Have you ever wondered why the espresso recipes we find online seem almost engineered to disappoint? Well, don't blame yourself. I can assure you that it's neither your fault nor the fault of your equipment. I've got a demonstration set up to make it clear that the whole exercise is filled with uncertainties. More importantly, if you believe that sharing espresso recipes is good crack and it surprises you to hear me say otherwise, then I would strongly recommend the following.
Oh my God.
It's like a miracle.
There are a number of variables that we'll consider, but I'd like to begin with an illustration of just how much coffee bean density can vary and how far off the mark that can throw your calculation. On the right, I've got some commercial beans from Lavazza, obviously low altitude and low density. They say this is for espresso and that it's light roast. The sample on the left is washed red Cachura from Peru, high-grown and very dense, which I roasted to a similar level of doneness. My sample's a bit darker, but close enough for our purposes. I'll start with 20 grams of the dense coffee. Now I'll tamp it. And we can see that looks like a reasonable fill level. I'll just check it. Using a shower screen and gasket, we can verify that there's no contact with the coffee surface, so there is at least enough headspace here for a shot. Now I'll take a measurement that I'll be able to compare with the other sample later. This metal spacer is around 1 millimeter thick. It's the shower screen from my Cafelat robot, which I remain quite fond of, by the way. I measure a distance of 7.8 millimeters from the basket rim to the spacer, or 8.8 millimeters to the surface of the coffee. Now let's check the other sample. Looks like we're off to a bad start. This is clearly overfilled and kind of awkward to handle, but I ground some extra so I can afford to spill a bit. Now we've got the same 20 grams, the same basket, and after tamping, it's clearly overfilled. You can see that just by eyeballing it. As you would expect, the shower screen is touching the coffee, and there's probably 1.5 millimeters to go. I'm a terrible photographer, so I hope you can see this gap here clearly. Let's measure. I'm reading 5.05 millimeters to the metal disc, so add 1 more millimeter for the spacer, and we've got a working headspace of 6.05 millimeters. Subtract that from 8.8, and we get a difference of 2.75 millimeters, which is almost an eighth of an inch. That's significant for a basket this size, easily enough to make a mess of your shot. So, with this basket, if you used the denser coffee, a 20-gram sample would work, but if you used this low-density coffee, a 19 or 20-gram shot absolutely would fail mechanically. Conversely, if a recipe were based on the low-density sample, say around 16 to 17 grams, and you tried to follow it using a high-density coffee like the Peruvian one here, you would end up with too much headspace, and the water's turbulence would likely cause the upper part of the coffee puck to disintegrate, leaving a soupy mess behind. So here's one reason why I'm so dismissive toward recipes. Coffee density varies a great deal. On the basis of that uncertainty alone, you can see that it's foolish to expect good things from someone else's research. You would need to use a very similar coffee and basket to get the same fill. And as I say repeatedly, the fill level is important. Correct headspace is the key to effortless, trouble-free puck prep. Once you understand that, you can throw out your whisks and tweezers and hydraulically actuated tamps. Get out of here with that. But mechanical fitness is just the start. There are a lot more reasons why espresso recipes are of little value except as a place from which to start dialing in. Let's look at flavor. If someone says they've got a great recipe to share, it means they've got a particular sample of coffee and they've tweaked a bunch of variables to make it taste the way they like. How many of those variables can you reproduce beyond the basics of shot time and ratio? Let's consider just the coffee sample itself. First off, there are dozens of different cultivars, and they've got different flavor characteristics. Second, there are various growing environments around the world. Differences in altitude, soil, rainfall, sun exposure, temperatures, and the like. Third, there are different processing methods, washed versus honey versus natural. Fourth, there's a broad range of roast levels. And fifth, different samples of roasted coffee can be blended, so just that amount of variability is virtually infinite. But there's more. What we're drinking is mostly water. Your brewing water has a major influence on flavor. There are numerous different minerals and chemical compounds that can turn up in your water in varying proportions that will affect its flavor. Brewing water temperature also affects coffee flavor. Espresso can potentially work with water between 88 and 96 degrees Celsius. I like to remind people that water temperature is a great tuning knob to play with because it doesn't require you to adjust any other variable. The machine and basket play their roles too. Water pressure and rate of flow have noticeable effects on flavor, primarily by affecting the contact time, but also the hydrodynamics inside the basket. Pressure is usually trivial to change, and so is flow rate. Some machines let you adjust it. Others, like an E61, might require you to change out the jet, or gicleur. But wait, there's more. Coffee particle size has a major effect. Higher flow rates and/or higher pressures require finer particles. Basket design has an effect too. Hole size and pattern will influence how finely or coarsely you'll need to grind. And coffee density as well. A denser coffee needs to be ground finer to hold the same pressure as a low-density sample. Finally, particle shape has an impact. This is where different grinders come into play. They'll give you different particle shapes and various sizes in varying proportions. And those effects are noticeable on the palate as well. So the potential variations and uncertainties really are infinite. If you really want to reproduce someone's recipe faithfully, you'll need their coffee sample, and you'll need to use the same espresso machine with all of the same settings, plumbed into the same water, and use the same grinder also with the same settings, which for individuals at home is preposterous. The only way that makes any sense is with a chain of cafes where you have a signature flavor and you actually can control all those variables in each of your locations. But in general, whether a recipe works or fails mechanically, or tastes good or bad, is all a matter of coincidence. Getting a tasty cup of coffee comes down to your own adjustments based on trial and error. And of course, as you gain experience and skill and understanding, you'll develop an intuitive sense of what will and won't work, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you step up to the kitchen counter. Well, that's about all for today. I've no idea what's up next. As I've said before, I'm not inclined to post unless I've got something to say that I think is worth your time and attention. But I'm bound to think of something, so keep in touch. Cheers.
As you face it feels me. For what we sow here now, today will bloom tomorrow. So I'm grateful for my peace. Grateful for my peace. Grateful for my